Definitely in normal times, you'd probably be right in the middle of your international trade unit. So these topics we're going to talk about today, I think would fit in nicely there. At the end of this, Jessica, I'm not sure about your PowerPoint. I don't know if you want to share it or not, but we can talk about that if teachers are interested in that. Okay, so I'm going to start. And Jessica has a PowerPoint that she's going to pull up and kind of talk about the PowerPoint as we go through my questions. So my first question to Jessica is if you could tell us a little bit about your background and current role at YKK Corporation of America.
Sure. Okay, so you should be able to see my slides now. Hopefully everybody can see it. Okay, so this is just my little intro slide here, but so I work at YKK Corporation of America. I'm the Vice President of Community Engagement and Communications. And basically what that means is I handle our government relations, public relations, and corporate communications for YKK Corporation of America. That YKK Corporation of America is YKK's North and Central American regional headquarters. So I'll talk a little bit more about our region later, but basically we cover Canada to Colombia, South America. And some of the things that I do, related to that community engagement and communications are things like planning events. I do a whole lot of speaking, as I am doing today. I do manage our region's corporate donations and philanthropy, as well as community outreach programs, and also have been tasked with leading our philosophy and core values initiative. So I'll also talk a bit about our philosophy too. And I have, you can kind of see from my brief little bio here, I have a Japan background. So I started off as a Japanese language major. Well, I went to Japan when I was in high school the first time. And then I majored in Japanese in college, eventually went on to get my master's in Japanese. And I spent 3 years, I did study abroad in Japan several times, spent 3 years working in Hiroshima Prefecture, and then have worked in various Japanese organizations since then. And I've got 4 kids, which I always like to include, especially today, because you may hear them in the background. I hope not, but they may come running through. And all of my kids are studying currently or have studied in Japanese English bilingual immersion schools in the Atlanta area. So many of them can speak Japanese better than I can.
Oh, that's great. All right. Thank you. So YKK has an extensive presence in Georgia. Can you tell us about the many different YKK facilities located in Georgia in terms of how many people are employed and what is being produced at the various facilities?
Sure. Okay, so right here you can see our regional map. And so as I mentioned before, we cover Canada to Colombia, South America. So we've got 12 companies, 8 countries in that region. And our group has 2 different divisions. One of them is what we call the fastening division. That's the one you're probably a little bit better known to you if you have heard of YKK. It's a company that makes zippers primarily. But we also make a variety of other fastening products. One is called Hook and Loop. You may know of Hook and Loop by the brand name Velcro. Velcro is the V word for us at YKK. We do not use the word Velcro. It is Hook and Loop. If you ever get a chance, you should look at a video that Velcro's attorneys came up with to tell people not to use the word Velcro because they have a bit of a problem with their copyright, their trademarking. You know, if you use a product like Band-Aid or something like that for too long, you can lose your trademarking. But anyway, so Velcro is our big competitor in that space. We also make plastic buckles and other type of plastic parts, webbing, and snaps and buttons. And then the other part of our business is we call YKK AP. That's architectural products. And those are products that are like windows and doors, a product called curtain wall, which is like the big aluminum framing that would go in a high-rise building, among other things. And you can see that we have a whole lot of locations all over the place, both manufacturing and sales offices. We've got approximately 3,000 employees in North America, and 1,500 of those are in Georgia.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about how and where did YKK get started? And was it with zippers?
Sure. Yeah, so actually, I'm really excited that you asked me this question because I'm not often asked this question, but this is a great story, and especially for teachers to share with your students about the value of perseverance. So YKK was founded in 1934 by Tadao Yoshida. So you can see his picture up in the upper left-hand corner. He actually only had a junior high school education. He really wanted to pursue his education, but he was the youngest of several children, did not have the means to be able to pursue that education. But he had a huge dream to just make his fortune somehow. He wanted to contribute to society. He was from a tiny town in Japan, absolutely tiny town. And as soon as he was old enough, he left for Tokyo, and he was going, again to do something impactful in the world. So he started working in a company that imported China ware, like porcelain, from China, and eventually had the opportunity to go to Shanghai and work in that business. Now, unfortunately, the war between Japan and China broke out, and so that company ended up going bankrupt. But one of the things that it had as a side business was a zipper business. And at the time, there were some Japanese manufacturers that were making zippers. But remember, back then, zippers were not really a common thing that were used in clothing. Zippers only really became common in like the 1950s when women started wearing the zip, the dresses with the zipper up the back. But if you think back to like, this is 1934 Japan. I mean, people were still not even really wearing, the Western clothes so much, and they just weren't really common. But there were a couple of zipper manufacturers. He started selling these zippers. He was really proud of the quality. But if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, zippers at the time were still manufactured by hand. Can you guys even imagine what those people are doing is sitting there and taking every single metal element that goes on a zipper and putting it by hand, one by one, onto the tape. A really quick person could make 100 zippers an hour. Anyway, so he, thought about different ways to improve this. Through constant improvement, he was able to eventually start his own factory where he was manufacturing his own zippers. So again, he started off selling somebody else's zippers, built his own factory. That factory was destroyed by fire during the war, during the air raids in Tokyo. So the first company he worked for went bankrupt. The second company, he built his own factory, burned down. He moved back to his hometown, the hometown that he said that he was never going to leave. And I'm sorry, he never wanted to go back to. He wanted to be in Tokyo. He had to move back to his hometown and start everything all over again. I believe he was 38 years old at the time. So he started from zero again, and that's where he built YKK. Now, when YKK was established, again, he had to start from scratch and gradually building up over time, ended up vertically integrating, which means that you make everything that goes into the process. So you take the cotton and spin it into your own yarn, which goes into the tape. You make your own metal with using your own foundries and everything. And through constant innovation, he built his company. But one of the really pivotal things that happened in 1947, he had an American buyer that came to visit him. Again, he's very proud of his products. So he was absolutely shocked. Like he to hear him tell it, he fell down on the floor when that American buyer showed him the American-made zippers. The reason was the American-made zippers at the time in 1947 were being made by machine. His were still being handmade. Those machine-made zippers were far surpassed YKK zippers in quality, and they were also a fraction of the price. So instead of just giving up, said, I got to get some of those American-made machines. So he went around to all the other zipper manufacturers in Japan and said, hey guys, let's pool our resources. Let's buy some American-made machines, and then we can compete with the Americans. And guess what happens? The other company said, nah, we don't want to spend that kind of money. You go figure it out on your own. So that's what he did. $35,000 loan in 1947. So that's a big chunk of change to import these chain machines, 4 chain machines from the United States. He went and improved those, rebuilt them, constantly, upgrading and innovating. And here we are today with YKK making more than half of the zippers in the world. So I always think that's a good story to tell.
Nice. I have an inflation calculator, and $35,000 today would be $392,000 that he borrowed.
Yeah. And again, this is a small manufacturer. This is not. This is back before it was really the YKK we know today. I mean, I know that was a huge risk for him. So I think that's a great story.
Right.
Oh, and you do see by the way, I didn't mention, but you also see the cycle of goodness, which is the corporate philosophy down there. That was also something something very important to Mr. Yoshida as he built his company, is the idea that no one prospers without rendering benefit to others. So it's all about the concept of saving, taking any profit that you get from your customers, reinvesting that back into the business to innovate, further improve. And then that will make your customers happy. They will buy more things from you. You're able to give back to your employees and the community, reinvest, and that's the cycle that will go on forever. So that's important to us also.
Okay. So at some point they come to Georgia, and my next question is, what were some of the factors that initially made Georgia an attractive place for YKK to do business?
Sure. So I've got, I love to tell the Georgia story also, because that's a great one. We actually did not start out in the United States in Georgia. We were first in New York, and that was 1960. That's quite early for a Japanese company to be in the United States. But we were basically just importing Japanese-made YKK zippers. And we were in New York because that's where the apparel industry was located. So back in the 60s, we were primarily manufacturing for the apparel industry. But around the late 1960s, early 1970s, many of you may be aware of this, the apparel industry, which had been headquartered in the Northeast, gradually started moving to the Southeast. So that's when you hear about all of those mills, up in Massachusetts area, New York area, starting to close down and then moving to places like North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, those reasons. So when we decided to set up manufacturing in the United States, we were only looking at the Southeast. We were thinking about Tennessee, North and South Carolina, and Georgia were all in the running. But really what happened was, for Georgia had a lot of good points anyway. So if you look at this map of Georgia, I mean, you can see that it's very strategically located as far as from a transportation perspective, right? You've got the port, which was really important. You have the big airport, which is really important. Also the highway system, that is really important. So that looked really good. But the biggest factor actually when Tadao Yoshida visited Georgia was this man right here, who was governor at the time. So Jimmy Carter and Tadao Yoshida met and very quickly became good friends. I mentioned to you about the cycle of goodness philosophy before. Jimmy Carter absolutely loved the concept of the cycle of goodness, and they just had very similar personalities, just hit it off. And so that pretty much, after that relationship began, Tadao Yoshida decided, yes, I'm going to, Georgia's the place to be. Now, as far as Macon is concerned, though, that also had everything to do with hospitality. So actually, the person who introduced the community of Macon to us was Cloyd Hall, who was the chief of staff of Governor Carter at the time. That was his hometown. And, but really, when you talk about economic development and these type of opportunities, I'm sure that Joseph is going to talk about this later. When it comes down to it, you can have the best, site in terms of logistics and everything else you want, but if you don't have really great people, it's really not going to be of interest. These, the people that are pictured here are what we call the original eights. They were the 8 community leaders in Macon that just absolutely bent over backwards to try to make Macon a welcoming community to YKK. Now, again, YKK was the first Japanese company to ever come to Georgia too, so it wasn't like everyone had a whole lot of experience in how to deal with foreign businessmen coming, but they were just fantastic. Now, it's funny, we always like to say that Macon, the people of Macon must really have known, though, what was going to happen, because originally we were just going to purchase 8 to 10 acres of land in Macon. And the Macon economic development official said, no, 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 what you really need is 54 acres. You're going to need like a much bigger plot of land. And so they were able to talk us into it. We did initially purchase 54 acres. Ground was broken in 1973, plant opens 1974. And this is what YKK looks like today. So as you can see, like it grew and grew and grew over time. Eventually that 54 acres was not enough. We had to buy 250 additional acres of land. And we just started really growing exponentially. But there's another part of the story that I want to tell you here, and this is kind of where the transition happened. So if you look from 1970s all the way up to about 2000, it was just growth, growth, growth. So like it was all about how do you manage the growth. There was only, one place to go, and it was up. But you'll recall that I said that YKK was really servicing the apparel industry, right? Well, I don't know how many of you out there know, those of you who work in economics may have heard this story before, but the US apparel industry has changed significantly since the time when YKK entered the market. So in 1960, when YKK, YKK was getting ready to build a factory in the United States, 95% of apparel sold in this country was produced in the United States. I don't know if you have any idea where it was in the 1990s and remains today, but it's 2% of the apparel that is bought in this country is manufactured in the United States. So 98% is imported, right? So you can just imagine what happened to our business. Late 1990s, these are major jeans factories. The locations of major jeans factories is represented by a star. Late 1990s, these are all of our customers. Can you imagine what happened to all of those once the NAFTA went into effect? China became part of the WTO. By 2006, they were gone. It was like they were almost gone overnight. And we realized the problem was we thought we were competing against our competitors. And you can see the blue is YKK and purple is our competitors. So we were doing a really good job competing against our competitors, which were American zipper manufacturers. What we did not anticipate and could not see almost until it was too late is what was happening with the imports. The imports just started skyrocketing as all of those apparel manufacturers moved offshore. So we had a crisis. I mean, we really had a crisis in around 2001, 2002. It was very likely that if something didn't change really quick, we were going to have to shut down that factory. That factory in 2001 was the biggest YKK factory in the world, had more than 1,000 people working there. Again, you saw the sales growth, and all of a sudden it just stopped. So what you can see the drop off there, it really just dropped off. It was almost overnight. And so what we had to do is we had to innovate. So we realized, hey, we can no longer focus on apparel. We got to figure out which customers are going to stay here in the United States, who is going to continue to manufacture in the United States so that we can continue to provide services for them. If apparel is gone, what else can we make that would, how else can you use the zipper? And so we started looking into things like the automotive industry. If you look at this, we have more than 20 products in most of the cars that you drive. You can't even see them. You wouldn't even imagine that there are zippers inside of your car. This is our fastest growing industry right now, is automotive. PPE, I'll talk a little bit more about PPE a little bit later on, but this is major for us. These are, the things where if that zipper fails inside of that product, it will kill the person that is wearing it. So things like fireproof zippers, waterproof zippers, if we're dealing right now with COVID-19, we have lots and lots of products that are being used within that industry. Things like space. This is Boeing's new spacesuit. Do you see what's right around at the bottom of the helmet? I don't know how many of you remember, but those old space suits used to have that big metal attachment right there. And apparently that was very uncomfortable for the astronauts. You couldn't get it on and off very easily. It obstructed the view. That is a big old YKK zipper on there. You just unzip it and zip it back up. But you don't want to have that thing failing. You know, if air gets in there, that astronaut is going to be dead. So again, those are some of the ways that we ended up transitioning. We also were able to take advantage of the port in Savannah to export all over the world. So our products are exported to over 40 countries, where YKK products made in Macon are being used for customers in all these countries around the world. And we also have a big brass wire foundry in Macon, which is one of only 3 that YKK has globally. And we are exporting our brass wire to 12 countries around the world as well. And then, you know, I mentioned to you about our AP products as well, also doing the same thing. This is our plant that opened in 1992 in Dublin, Georgia. And one of the reasons that factory decided to stick with Georgia is because YKK had been so successful because of all of the things that I mentioned, the great workforce, the you know, great logistics, and business-friendly state. So that business has been extremely successful as well. So
Jessica,
long answer. Yeah.
one more question about COVID-19,
Yeah.
and like 2 minutes or less. How has the COVID-19 crisis impacted YKK's ability to produce fasteners and architectural products here in Georgia?
Yeah, so so the interesting thing about that, you know, I just mentioned to you that we used to focus on apparel. One of the things we are really focusing on now is PPE and medical. So we actually had a lot of customers already that manufactured those products. So here are a couple examples of some of the things that we are making to help combat COVID-19. So most of the orders that are coming in right now are specifically for the products that are being used to help manage this crisis. So a lot of the medical masks, the containment units, you can see some examples of like those mobile hospitals, especially if you see the pictures up in New York City of those hospitals that are being set up in Central Park, et cetera, are being used, you know, it's using YKK zippers in it. So we are very glad that we made the transition, you know, when we did, because now we're able to help fight this crisis together with our customers.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, and again, we'll have more questions for you at the end.
Yeah,
Joe,
let me ask one quick one, because I think you can just answer this with a quick yes or no. Terry Lewis wants to know, did the Cherry Blossom Festival in Macon coincide with YKK coming in? Do you know?
It did. We were there before that. It was not directly, it's not directly related. We have been involved with the Cherry Blossom Festival for a very long time. But yeah, so there's no direct relationship between YKK and the Cherry Blossom Festival.
okay. All right, thank you. Next, we're going to talk with Joseph Huntemann from the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Joseph, you're hopefully unmuted. If we could start, Joseph, by telling us a little bit about your background and your current role at the Georgia Department of Economic Development.
Sure. So I'm a project manager with the Georgia Department of Economic Development on what we call our global commerce team. We've got 2 sides to global commerce. We've got new industry recruitment, and then we've got existing industry retention and expansion. So I work with new company recruitment, primarily with international companies. Japan's my main market. I've been doing this since the end of 2012, and have had, we're going to discuss, I think, one of my projects, Nippon Light Metal, later on. That's an example, but I've worked with companies like Rinnai, Toyo Inc., Topan Printing, several others, Marukan Vinegar, and they're all scattered all over the state. I don't work exclusively with Japan, just mostly with Japan. My other big market's Israel, and typically in Japan twice a year, in Israel once a year, working to try and drum up new leads on companies that are thinking about an investment in the United States. And once we meet with them, we kind of guide them through the process of finding a site and finding a community that meets their needs. So before I joined the department, I worked at the consulate the Japanese consulate, let me specify. My office and then later my desk was next to Jessica's. When we were in the information center there for, gosh, it was 5 years overlapping, I think. I joined the consulate in 2007, and that was after graduating from Georgia Tech with a master's degree in international affairs.
Okay. Now, for teachers, if you've never looked at the Georgia Department of Economic Development's website, it's not teacher specific, but there's a ton of information on there that I know will help you in the classroom. A lot of the international workshops that we do at the Georgia Council, that's one of the main resources we use to sort of find information, you know, to share with teachers. So check that out when you get a chance. Joseph, you could tell us a little bit about, you know, the main goals of the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and do the other 49 states have something similar to what you guys are doing?
Sure. So, I mean, the overarching goal of the department is to provide economic opportunity for Georgians, right? And we work through a variety of means to accomplish that. Global Commerce, my section, is probably the largest in the department, but we also promote Georgia agriculture. We promote Georgia tourism. We've got a division dedicated to film and media entertainment, which, as I think most people know, has been very large here in the state over the past 5-6 years. The Georgia Council for the Arts is under our wing too. So we really, through all of these different means and aspects. Oh, and I neglected to mention, we do have an international trade division that helps primarily Georgia exporters, although they have connected Georgia companies with overseas suppliers in the past. And that's the overseas investment and the international trade missions are facilitated in large part through 13 international offices that we have around the world. The first of those offices having been set up in Tokyo in 1974. So we really, through a lot of different means, a lot of different aspects of the economy, work to promote the welfare of all of our fellow Georgians.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the Georgia-Japan relationship as far as businesses coming here? Jessica mentioned YKK was the first many years ago. Just an idea of how many Japanese companies are here.
Sure. So yeah, there are more than, we don't have an exact count, but more than 600 Japanese companies in the state of Georgia. Japan's our largest investor nation by far in terms of dollars invested and jobs created. YKK was the first major manufacturer out of Japan to come to Georgia, and we are always gratified to see that they're still growing strong throughout all these years. The Georgia-Japan office, as I said, was opened up not long after YKK landed from the 70s under Governor Jimmy Carter. He opened that office, as well as our Europe office is in Munich now. It was first opened in Brussels. Yeah, it's been, there are over, as I said, 600 Japanese companies, more than, although, you know, excepting extraordinary circumstances over the past month or so, I don't think I could redo the math, but until recently, we're over 30,000 Georgians directly employed at Japanese companies across the state. Out of those 600 or so companies, 150 to 200 are manufacturers, so it's a very manufacturing heavy presence within the state, and that's good for our citizens because it's not due to necessities that come with manufacturing. It's not all concentrated in one area of the state. It really is spread out across all of Georgia.
Okay. So when you're out there promoting, you said Japan's one of the countries you work with. When you're promoting Georgia as an attractive location for Japanese businesses, what are the main selling points of our state?
So I think Jessica covered half of them in her presentation, or maybe more. It's the, you know, companies are looking for the place where they can minimize their risk and maximize their profit, right? That's the same no matter what company you're talking about. And it's really, Georgia's interesting in that we're not a one-trick pony. We don't specialize in one industry sector. We don't have one standout characteristic. It's really the entire package. It's a combination of workforce, logistics, business environment, and taxation regime. The level of support at the local and state levels to provide companies with a good environment for their business. You asked how, Georgia's approach to economic development, how is it similar and how is it different to the other 49 states? Every state does it differently. Some states, it's mainly carried out at the local municipality or county level. Other states are very hierarchical, where the state leads most projects coming in. But in Georgia, we're rated #1 for business. We have been for the past 7 years. Keeping my fingers crossed that will get #8. 7's already unprecedented. But it's a unified team approach to economic development. Everybody's on the same page. We work with our local community partners. We work with utility companies. We work with private industries. When a company is looking for a location, my office pulls together all of the pieces and all of the partners who are going to be able to make that project a success. And it's an end-to-end solution where we help companies all the way from the site selection phase, where they're looking for a piece of property or a site or an office building. They're looking at analyzing their workforce, their logistics. We provide all of that information to them, the costs for labor, for utilities, for manufacturing inputs, for services if it's a non-manufacturing project. We find the optimal locations in the state. We present all of the information to them. Incentives, of course, are a piece of that. We are competitive when it comes to incentives. We don't just throw cash at projects. We really take time to invest in the companies and invest in our people. That's why we say Georgia Quick Start, which is the state's workforce training program, customized workforce training program. That's a part of the technical college system. That's really our #1 incentive for companies, because Quick Start has institutional knowledge from the thousands of customized training projects that they've worked through over the past 50 years that can't be easily replicated or found in other states. And it really is a unique asset for us. So we like to say, we do invest in companies and we provide incentives, but we invest in our people first. And that's what has kept us at the top, especially over the past decade or so.
All right. You mentioned a little bit earlier that the big company that's in Cartersville that you had a big hand in bringing to our state. So can you tell us a little bit about Nippon Metal and what they produce and exactly or roughly what kind of economic impact this will have for the Cartersville area and Georgia as a whole?
Sure. So NLM, well, let me preface it by saying, we've gone over sort of the basic factors of what drive company decisions, but every project is a little different too, right? So in the case of NLM, they are a tier 1 automotive supplier. They make forged aluminum suspension components, okay? I don't know how familiar you are with trends in the automotive industry, but lightweighting, I know that's not really a verb, but reducing weight and mass on vehicles to hit fuel efficiency targets, and especially with battery electric vehicles coming along, is even more critical to get that range on BEVs maximized. So they've got highly advanced aluminum suspension components, a lot of which used to be made with much heavier and denser steel. But the designs and the materials they're using are far more advanced than what you would have found in a car even 10 years ago. So it's a unique product now. We're in the middle of the southern automotive alley here in Georgia. You've got Nissan to the north, Honda to the west. You've got BMW to the east. Again, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, Volvo. You know, we're surrounded. We do, of course, have Kia as our hometown hero in West Point, Georgia, right? And most tier ones, they'll supply more than one OEM. So Georgia was attractive from a logistical standpoint, right? In the case of NLM, they are not going to be using the port so much. It was critical for them to source locally because these are high volume, low margin products. And so they needed to be close to their supply chain and their customers. Well, their largest customer as of right now is Nissan. And so they were already looking in Northwest Georgia if they were going to consider a location in the state. But with all of these projects, you know, there's a bit of serendipity too. And it turned out that a supplier of high quality aluminum of a grade that they would be able to use in their products. And there are not many of these suppliers. A company called Vista Metals, which is in Adairsville, happens not only to be located close to I-75, but also had available land, industrial land. So it was what was looking like a win-win for NLM because they were able to would be able to locate right next to their key raw material supplier and cut down on transportation costs tremendously in terms of bringing that in while still being close to their customers, right? So I had met with the company before they ever met with Vista, and we had introduced several suitable sites based on their search criteria, based on location, based on size, based on available workforce. And they actually, on their own, in speaking with potential suppliers, because there were not many companies that could provide this high-grade aluminum, in their talks with Vista Metals, this came up. And so this was one of the rare instances where rather than one of the locations that we at the department or a site selection consultant came up with, the company came back with this site next to their key supplier. And that was really what ended up driving the location. I mean, of course, we offered the company incentives, right? And then the community offered the company incentives as well. So we put together a complete package. We answered all of their questions about, you know, the utility costs and infrastructure. They got a grasp of exactly what it would take to get that site prepped and ready for a new manufacturing facility. And it worked out in the end. It was a win for Vista Metals. They actually are the landlord. They were able to provide that benefit of leasing, constructing a facility and leasing it to them, reducing their costs, as well as providing the raw materials that they needed. So it was a very unique project. And you know, companies like to give us a hard time on incentives, and of course we are always competitive on that front, but at the end of the day, that's not the driving factor for most of these location decisions. The company's going to go where they know they're going to achieve long-term success even after the incentives run out, and that was certainly the case with NLM.
What you just said brings up a question for me is, which states typically, if there are any typical states, are usually Georgia's main competitors for like a large manufacturing company?
So as you could imagine, we compete with everybody. I mean, I've competed with China and Mexico for projects, right? Companies were considering locations in those places. I've had companies cancel a project because they ended up acquiring a company instead of building their own facility somewhere. But as you could guess, it's mainly the southeastern states right? Especially in automotive like NLM, Tennessee is going to be very strong. Alabama is going to be very strong. South Carolina is going to be very strong. It's our neighbors. We're frenemies. We'll meet the economic developers from those states at places like the Select USA Summit in Washington, D.C. And, we all like one another, but at the end of the day, we're competitors too. Sometimes it's New York, sometimes it's Texas. It just depends on the type of project. We compete with, until recently, we competed with Austin for a lot of corporate offices and headquarters. Now it looks like, Nashville is one of our biggest competitors in that area. So it just depends on what kind of project it is, but at the end of the day, mostly our fellow Southeastern neighbors.
Okay. And a final question, how long of a process typically does it take to land a company of that size?
Yeah, so it depends as much on the company and company culture as it does on the project itself. Japanese companies take a longer time to make a decision than U.S. domestic or most other sort of business cultures. You might, from your experiences working with the Japanese, you might already have an inkling of how that is. A typical project, 6 months to a year. Usually these projects are on a cycle of 6 months to a year. Japanese projects say 18 months to 2 years is more realistic. When I'm working with the Israelis, they'll turn it over in 3 months. I mean, they're the culture over there, where it's get it done and we're going to get it done and we're going to figure out how to make it work as we go. Just the environment you're in over there sort of promulgates that. They all come out of the military. There's mandatory military service, and when you're in an area where you've got to constantly be thinking on your feet, that's sort of inculcated into you over the years. So it can vary, but say just on average about a year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joseph. All right, Chris, what are the questions we have for our two speakers?
Yeah, I got several for Jessica, but before we switch over to Jessica, Joseph, could you, I think the Israeli thing, I know we're talking about Japan here, but real quick, the Israeli thing caught my attention. I didn't expect you to say that. What are there some company names you could throw out at us that we might know? Like, I can't think of too many Israeli companies off the top of my head.
Yeah, so the Israeli presence in Georgia is interesting in that it's sort of split down the middle between manufacturers and cybersecurity. So you got a lot of little cybersecurity and office companies in the metro Atlanta areas. You could imagine the bulk of them are. And then the manufacturers, there's actually a pretty substantial cluster in the Savannah coastal area. So probably the flagship Israeli manufacturer would be Caesarstone. If you've got one of their countertops in your kitchen, they're pretty well known. Another company, Bramley Plastics, they make, you probably have to check the mark on any of their products in your home. But for Walmart and Bed Bath & Beyond and Target, they make plastic kind of baskets and containers. There's a good chance you've got one or two of their products in your house if you looked at some of those. On the corporate side, it's not a cybersecurity company, but Maytronics, their U.S. headquarters is in Duluth, Georgia. They are the leading maker of pool cleaning robots. So if you have a Dolphin pool cleaning robot, if you know that name, that's Maytronics, and their headquarters are about, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes from Jessica's house, I think. Then Checkmark's a big cybersecurity company. They've got a huge office in Atlanta. Cyber 2.0 is one you may or may not have heard of. There are a bunch of them in the tech sector.
That's very cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. Jessica, Laura Lamprin from DeKalb wants to know, is YKK the only company that makes things like those specialty zippers for cars and spacesuits? It seems like these markets would be so small, there wouldn't be a lot of room for competition.
We do have competitors in that space in the United States. We don't have a lot of competitors to answer your question. So yes, for things like that, we have one or two competitors here in the US. Now, when you get into the apparel side on a global scale, we have more than 2,000 competitors just in China. So that gives you some idea. Yes, that's why we're focusing on the very high tech, more expensive, fancier zippers, because it's pretty tough for us to compete, with Chinese manufacturers on the lower end.
So the Chinese thing leads into the next question, and I don't know if you were watching on the chat too, but a couple of years ago when we toured the zipper factory on our manufacturing tour, they talked to us about counterfeiting. Somebody's holding up their YKK
Mousepad looks like.
mousepad thing. Yeah, they talked to us about counterfeiting, and I remember that as well. I remember sitting there in that, they did talk about China, like just using YKK letters on their zippers, but they really weren't YKK zippers. Pam Roach's question from Cobb County is, has that changed or is that still an issue?
No, it's definitely still an issue. We have a person in my office in Atlanta who specializes in that, in protecting our intellectual property. She travels all around the United States to all of the customs offices, making sure, educating customs officials on what a counterfeit looks like, what to look for. It's incredibly detailed, actually. It's really interesting. I mean, you can tell what a counterfeit is even when it's done really well, but you have to look, really, really hard. There's certain things that we put into the slider of the zipper that is basically a mark that, that it's the way that the little circle is, a little notch in it, that says that it's not counterfeit. But yeah, it's a big problem for us, actually. We not only outright counterfeiting, but they'll also do things like, we've seen everything from like the logo says YIC, and the IC is really close to each other. So it's got like the I and the C. So like it's a tiny part that looks like a YKK, but they'll come back to us and say it's not YKK, it's YIC. And yeah, so it is a big issue for us. It's also a big issue for our customers, though, if you think about it too,
Sure.
because what happens most of the time, our customers do not want to end up with any counterfeit goods in their products. And sometimes they don't always realize that they may be purchasing counterfeit products, because what happens is a lot of the big brands don't necessarily own their own factories in some of these manufacturing locations like China, Bangladesh, Vietnam. They are outsourcing. And then those companies are also, outsourcing to where they're procuring their trims. So zippers and other things are considered trims. So what we have done to partly, overcome this hurdle as well is back in the late 1990s, we established the Global Marketing Group, which we have people that work in that group all over the world, but their job is to work with the major American brands in order to procure YKK zippers in whatever country in the world they need to get them. So they might be working with, like, let's say a company like Gap, and we would be working directly with Gap headquarters, but Gap is manufacturing in 30 countries,
Right.
and we would work with YKKs in 30 countries. That helps that problem somewhat, because it reduces the middle person. Otherwise, sometimes there's quite a bit of incentive for someone in some of these countries to just work with, my brother-in-law works at this, zipper company,
Yeah, sure.
and they can just get the zipper for us. But yeah, big problem for us.
Daniel Sobczak says, I noticed on one of the graphics you showed, Mexico was a country that received our exports. And he says, most of my jeans seem to be made there. So are those Georgia zippers on his Mexican-made jeans, would you suspect?
Yeah, and actually we have manufacturing operations in Mexico as well. So it works, it does work both ways, but it's really interesting, especially with Mexico and especially with NAFTA, is that oftentimes these products are, well, first of all, let me clarify what I meant by export. So our Macon plant makes everything in the zipper pretty much. Like we weave everything, we make the brass, we make the wire that it goes into making the elements. So whereas in Mexico we do have manufacturing, but it's somewhat limited. So what we often will mean by exporting to Mexico is we're exporting some part of that process already finished, and then Mexico will finish it up for us.
Okay.
So sometimes that's when it gets really complicated, right? Is how the supply chain works, because yes, you'll get a piece of clothing that says it's made in Mexico. I actually saw this really great chart that shows how many times your pair of jeans has crossed back and forth, back and forth, back and forth across the border throughout that supply chain. The only thing that influences where that tag is where like pretty much the final assembly takes place. The cotton is grown in the United States, but then it may go across the border for like weaving, and then may go back from dyeing, and then it might end up, back. And then the zipper comes partly from Macon and partly from Mexico and assembled in Mexico and back. The automotive bit is this. We make products that go mostly into seats of cars. The average seat that is in your car goes back and forth across the border 7 to 8 times.
Wow.
In multiple locations.
You don't happen to remember where you saw that chart, do you? The teachers are asking, where's that chart?
I will send it to you right after this is done. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, if you do, teachers would like to have that. Another teacher wanted to let you know that she still has her YKK keychain from the manufacturing.
Oh, great.
Those manufacturing tours, we hold on to that stuff. Joseph, question for you. Michael Herndon from up in North Georgia wants to know, did you have any role in Amazon's HQ2 search? And what were some of the selling points in that realm?
Okay, so let me say first, I work with international investment, and HQ2 was a domestic project, but that was an all hands on deck effort, as you can imagine. When I was saying earlier, we work with our partners at the local level and in the private sector. So our main day-to-day partners on these projects are the utility companies here, Georgia Power, Georgia EMC, and the municipalities, MEAG Power, Electric Cities of Georgia. And we had staff from all of those working with us. We also had staff from Georgia Tech, from UGA, the technical college system, the Georgia Department of Education, and the Board of Regents, and the university system of Georgia. I mean, it was Georgia DOT. It was unlike anything before or since in terms of the organizational forces that were pulled together to make that pitch to Amazon. So cool. I didn't directly work on that project. I was kind of spared that pain, especially considering how it turned out. But what it did at the end of the day was it really sharpened our organization and deepens the relationships we had with all of those partners to the point now where it's the way we interact with them, which began with the HQ2 project, is kind of become our natural MO moving forward. So it's strengthened us quite a bit after it was all said and done. And we don't have to basically make a new city in Georgia to accommodate a company as a result too.
What's that? Do you know off the top of your head the largest Japanese company in Georgia in terms of employment?
So there's a few heavy hitters, right? Probably Kubota, would be my guess. And Jessica, you were at Kubota for a while, right? They've got between the Jefferson and Gainesville facilities, probably, and it depends on whether or not you include temps or only permanent staff, but around 2,500 folks or so employed amongst all of their facilities, not including the suppliers. But then you've also got Yamaha Motor Manufacturing in Noonan. You've got Toyo Tire up near Cartersville.
That's a big one.
You've got YKK. Of course, I'd say it's a toss-up between YKK and Kubota, honestly, for top dog. Pick any given day, depending on just how their business is ebbing and flowing. Jessica, you might be able to provide some confirmation on that in terms of YKK's current workforce. I don't know.
Yeah, we have about 1,500 in Georgia. So yeah, Kubota is much larger than we are now.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. I have one more, and this is a good question to wrap up on. And then I also want to give Yoshi a moment if he wants to address everyone to talk to. But Yoshi from Japan American Society has a good question here that both of you, I think, could weigh in on. The question is, with the current pandemic, in your opinion, will manufacturing companies be looking to hire people with new skill sets or different skill sets once the public health environment goes back to, and he puts quotes around, normal? How do you see this playing out? I think both of you could probably weigh in on that.
Well, if I can go first here, is that okay, Jessica? Or
Please.
I from what I've seen and from seeing the projects I've worked over the past 7 years of the department, I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the skill sets that companies are looking for. What I think rather is it's going to accelerate many of the trends we've seen, especially amongst manufacturers. You know, increased automation, increased focus on capital investment versus employment. In the case of corporate, you're going to see more flexibility with where you can work from, what your work hours work like. You know, these were things that were already happening. But moving forward, it's just going to reinforce those trends in my estimation.
Jessica, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with everything that Joseph said. I would have said pretty much the same thing with automation. I will say speed. You know, I think Joseph alluded to it earlier, is that Japanese companies are not, if they're known for their quality, they're not known necessarily for their speed. And we're finding having to, just to get through this crisis right now, just having to move a whole lot faster than we, you know, would normally, and we really need to keep that up even after this passes, in terms of making decisions more quickly and moving, you know, forward a bit more quickly.
I appreciate that. And I will send, I don't know if everybody's following the chat over there, but in the chat, Yoshi Demoto did post some links to some things. I will make sure I send those out in the email to everybody. Yoshi, did you want to address the group real quick? I don't want to put you on the spot, and that's okay if you don't, but if you want to unmute yourself. Give me a second to.
Just real quick, I know everyone's busy, but I just want to thank you, Chris, and Mike, and the entire team at the council. Your work right now is as important as ever. And certainly to all the teachers, thank you for everything that you're doing. We got 2 kids at home, and I know kind of it's a different world teaching students right now. So I really appreciate, from a personal basis and on behalf of the Japan American Society, we appreciate all the hard work you're doing. And you guys are just as people kind of fighting on the front lines as everyone else, I think, in healthcare too. So thank you. But as Chris mentioned, you know, we do offer a variety of ways we can help support, you know, kind of your teaching inside and outside the classroom. We do have a program where we visit classrooms to talk about Japan. It could be about economics. It could be about Japanese culture. Right now, we're doing everything virtually. So we'd be happy to meet with your students virtually as well. And then through our network, you can meet great people just like Jessica and Joseph and many other kind of leaders of the Japanese business community too. So, but I just want to thank everyone. And if there's anything that any of us can do to kind of help support your teaching and then your students during these times, you know, we're here for you. And I think the only way we're all going to get through this is together. So, but thank you again for all that you do.
Thanks, Yoshi.
Yep. Mike, any final words?
No, I want to thank Jessica and Joseph both for coming on and sharing all of their knowledge. We really appreciate everything you continue to do to help us help teachers. I know that I loved the last hour, really learned a lot of things about Georgia and the Japan relationship. Going forward, teachers on the call, either in the fall or the spring, we'll try to have an in-person workshop focused on Japan, like we typically do every semester, or every spring anyway. So again, thank you all for joining us. Jessica, Joseph, we owe you. This was great. We really appreciate it. And teachers, we'll see you next Thursday. We've got a webinar on Germany and related to the BMW factory in South Carolina. So if you want to join us then, register now. That's filling up. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. No survey for this one, so we'll see you all next time.
All
Or the
right.
survey will be in the email, sorry. So, thanks.